Hi, welcome to this pinup art style process video tutorial-ish kind of thing. The total time for this drawing was about 9 or 10 hours. So since I sped it up to half an hour, it is going to go kind of fast, but I'm going to do my best to kind of explain the most important kind of bits and pieces of what I'm doing. I won't be able to explain everything just because, like I said, it's 9 hours of decision making that speeds by really quickly. But I figured I can share enough of the process that you guys can get a general idea of what I'm doing. And I mean, you can also just watch what I'm doing too, I guess. So, whether you learn by seeing or you learn by doing or listening, whatever, we kind of got our bases covered here. But yeah, this is Iono. I'm drawing her. She's from the new Pokemon Scarlet and Violet game. Just working on this here. What I usually do at the start of every drawing is try to get it rendered enough that I can get rid of my sketch. I usually try to get rid of the undersketch as fast as possible just because I find that, hey, if my sketch is there and it looks great in the drawing with the sketch and I take it away and it looks really bad, I'm like, oh, I need it to render more. I don't want to deal with that. So what I try to do is I get just enough of the coloring done that I can get rid of my undersketch as fast as possible. So whether that means what I'm doing here, like I actually draw in the face, kind of, and just a little bit of the detail lines for when things are meant to separate, because at this stage in the drawing, everything is going to look really Play-Doh-y. So I'm just trying to get enough of the details in that I don't need my sketch anymore. That way, when I get rid of that and I see the drawing, I see the final result. How it looks is how it's going to look later. So even with my sketch initially, it was like a 10%. And then when I'm done with it, I just toggle it to be invisible. I'll still hang on to it because sometimes I forget really tiny details and I go back and check my sketch just in case, because I might get a little bit hung up on the painting process and be like, wait a second, people have 5 fingers. So I'll keep it there kind of just as a fail-safe just to make sure, but I do usually try to get rid of it as fast as possible. So what I'll do is I'll block things in really rough, and I'll also add in the face. Now, this face that I'm drawing right now isn't the final face. I'm just trying to draw enough of it that I can go back later and actually make it finished. And I mean, I know that usually through the magic of video editing, you can cut out, any bits of your struggle. Be like, oh, I drew the face. Let's just cut to when I figured it out and I was happy with it. But I figured it would be more helpful for you guys if I actually left this part in. So if you're wondering like, oh, why is he messing with the face so much? This is honest. It's the real process, okay? I think a third of the total time I spend on every single drawing is always the face. It just takes forever. But you see, I redraw it, I change it, I tweak it, I flip my canvas, I do everything I can just to make sure that that looks right. So here you see me just trying to mess with it, and I did eventually settle on the first face that I drew. I just tweaked the eyes a little bit and I was happy with it. But like I said, this face isn't even going to be the final one, so I'm not too hung up with it looking 100% like right away. I just need it to look good enough that I know that I can finish this drawing. But usually what I'll do is I try to make sure that the face looks right so I know that I can finish the drawing, because I don't want to spend 10, 15, 20 hours on a piece, realize I can't finish the face and need to scrap the entire drawing entirely. So what I'll do is I'll draw a face in that's kind of a placeholder and make sure that that's right. So here you see I'm actually getting closer to something that I like, and I'm like, yeah, this works. Courtesy of just like me finding some face references online, kind of just from the general angle that I was looking for. Lighting was close enough. It wasn't exact, but sometimes you just got to work with what you got. You're like, this is close enough, and you know what? We'll work with this. They didn't even have the expression that I was going for in that reference, but it was just, oh, the face is at the right angle. I can draw the expression myself. So it was close enough, so we made do with that. But now that I got the general base coloring in and I got the face in, and I know that, hey, this is a drawing I can actually finish, I actually go in and add a little bit of lighting and shadow. So this is where I try to figure out the light source for everything. I think that this is better done at the beginning rather than at the end, because I don't want to render something and make it all pretty and zoom out and realize I have 19 different light sources. And I'm like, oh no! So usually what I'll do right at the very beginning of every single piece is make sure that it's cohesive and that it makes sense. So I try to get all the details down just enough that I know this is going to look right, I try to make sure that the face is in right. I pick a designated light source, and you see here right now I'm just photo bashing in some of the basic elements for the background. Nothing final yet, but it's just enough that I'm like, okay, this is generally how the background is going to look. This is generally how the character is going to look. So this is a first pass. Pretty much what I know will constitute a good first pass is if you look at the top right on that little navigator, your drawing might look great to you on a canvas that's the size of a freaking bus, but if you're like, wait, people are going to see this on their phone, I try to make sure that small navigator preview looks okay, because if it reads really well when it's small, it should read well when it's large. But if it doesn't look like it makes a lot of sense over there, I'm usually trying to tweak it. So this is a combination of, I look at the drawing from fully zoomed out, I look in the corner to make sure things look right, and I make a lot of my decisions based off of what that navigator in the corner is telling me. So if it's just like, there's not enough contrast here, there's too much contrast over here, this spot blends into this spot too much, I'll actually look at that navigator, kind of decide what I'm going to do, and then go back to my image and work on that there. And I also make a second canvas. So what I'll do is I'll be zoomed in on my drawing like this, but I'll also have a huge preview on a second screen so I can see the entire picture all at once. And I don't know, I feel like the longer I paint, the more I just look at my canvas and try to decide what it needs. I wish it was like automatic and you're like, bam, I know what it needs, but I'll spend a lot of time looking at my canvas and being like, there's not enough contrast between the side of the face and the bottom of the chin. Those blend together. There needs to be more contrast between her shoulder, which looks like it's blown out in the light against the sky. So, add a hard line there or add a soft line here. But I find that if you do actually have a full view of your piece at all times, that's definitely going to help you out, especially with the values, because you can say, these values are too close together. This one's too bright. That one's too dark. This is too close to this color. This is mixing into that too much. And you know what to separate and what to kind of blend out better. And yeah, I hope that any of what I am saying makes sense. But it is really helpful because you do have a view of your canvas on a big picture and on a small picture. But yeah, that's kind of how I decide my values. So now that I'm done with that, I'm actually just going in and actually adding in the detail. So I know that this is about 2 hours in and I'm finally done with my first pass, which means I have my lighting the way I want it. I have the character pose more or less how I want it. Nothing looks too broken. I mean, a little broken, sure, that's fine. That's acceptable, I guess, but not super broken. She doesn't have 7 fingers on one hand because she's not some scary AI generated thing. It's like, no, dude, this is like, we make sure that the foundation of the drawing is correct first, and then I'll go in and add the detail. So I think that the most important part is actually like the first 2 hours of the piece. You make sure that your composition is good, that your lighting is good, that your background is kind of what you want it to be. You want to make sure that the picture as a whole reads really well first before you go in and spend the next 10, 20 hours, whatever, rendering and making things look pretty. So that's usually my order for things. Make sure that the image makes sense. And then I'll go in and spend the next several hours trying to render it, because I effectively figured out the entire thing from start to finish in 2 hours. And then I spend the next 8 hours making the pixels all blendy and pretty looking. And that just kind of is the process, and it just is time consuming. I wish there was a shortcut for that, but it's just time consuming. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But I know that in my workflow, I like to kind of work on everything all at once rather than get tied up to one specific thing. Because like I said, I'll just look at my navigator and say, this needs a little bit more of this. This needs a little bit more of that. I actually didn't like how the hair was looking, so I went and I changed it. Which is, pretty early on, so I don't need to beat myself up about it. I find that the thing that helps me the most is trying to figure out a workflow where you're not stepping on your toes as much as possible. So what I mean by that is, say I work on the face and then I entirely render out the face and I decide I don't like it. I still keep that version of the face and draw another one. But, if I don't like the new one and decide I like the old one better, I still have it as a backup layer. If I like or don't like the hair, that's on a separate layer than the face. So it's above it, and I can tweak and move and transform it as much as I want, and I won't need to keep redrawing the underparts of the face over and over and over again. So I pretty much just use layers for separation. If I want to experiment or try something different out and I try to tweak something, that's usually going to go on a new layer. And then as I decide that I like it, or yeah, this is worth keeping, then I'll kind of merge things down as I go. So I work on a lot of layers, but not a lot of layers at the same time. But if there's something I'm unsure about, it's usually on a new layer. And other than that, it's just me trying to, I know that the drawing looks really complicated, but I do really try to break it down into as much basic shapes as possible, because there's no point in rendering something to look super detailed if it's not going to look right. So, for example, the shoulders I have a really hard time with. I was working on those for a really long time, trying to make them really detailed, and I was just like, just doesn't look like a shoulder. So, pull up references, but you realize, hey, yeah, arms are kind of cylinder-esque, and your shoulder is kind of like a round pivot that has like a little divot in it. So it's just me trying to get back into basic shapes. I know that sounds very unga bunga, because it's just like, I mean, this looks way more detailed than a basic shape, and you're right, but I kind of try to start with basic shapes first, just to make sure that things are more or less okay and that they read well. But here I'm just going into more of the detailing. So I had worked on a lot of the character, and now I'm actually starting to go back and work on some of the hair. And some of the details for the tweaks. I decided I don't 100% like where the coat is at. It doesn't make a lot of sense, so I just decided to go back and change it. I feel like it's good to not get too hung up on something. I know that this far into the process, you might be a little bit precious about your stuff and be like, oh, but I spent 20 hours on this. I don't want to go ahead and change it. But I feel like if you're willing to change something that's just not working, the drawing will be better for it. So it's like, I mean, it just sucks to suck sometimes, buddy boy. So we got to change things around. We got to make it work. Here you see that I'm working on the definition for the stomach again. Something that helps me out is sometimes I don't 100% get details right if there's clothing overlapping it. So she has like her swimsuit thing, but I wasn't liking how that was looking with the actual like her tummy underneath. So it's just like, why don't we draw her stomach first and then make sure that that's right? Because, in real life, your stomach's not going to move whether you're wearing clothing or not. It's going to pretty much look close to the same. So I was like, let's draw that. Let's make sure that that looks right first, and then I'll go ahead and add the clothing on top of it. So, this little section right here might be why I get demonetized, but I feel like it is important for people to know. Has nothing to do with this being a spicy art or like a pinup or whatever. It's just like, no, dude, like sometimes you just need to get the anatomy good. It's kind of like when you're doing a drawing, like a gesture drawing for your piece. You got to make sure that the pose is good, and then you add clothing on top of your character. It's like that, but for painting. And I wish that I could say, oh, hey, but it would make my process more time efficient, because if I make variants of this piece and they're spicy, I already drew the stomach, right? You'd be right if I wasn't dumb. So I actually did end up going back and drawing everything for the stomach again. So that stomach that you saw me draw for this piece is literally just to make sure that the stomach is right, like it's in the right spot for this one. So, again, back to not stepping on your toes. I don't know. I guess sometimes it just sucks, and work is work. But, I feel like if you like what you're doing, it's okay. And, it's going to suck a little bit sometimes. But here what I'm doing is I'm just adding in a little bit more of the details. I kept the clothing separated so that way I could free transform it. And here with the hands, you see me kind of just starting into those. So I don't know. It's kind of weird because in the beginning it's going to look like a little Play-Doh-y, and you just need to trust that at some point these will hopefully start looking like hands. I do have references. They do help a lot, but you see I kind of just tweak and transform and change things. Again, like I said, through the magic of editing, I could have made this a lot more neat and straightforward, but I felt like it would be good for you to see how many times I actually change my mind on something. I'll be like, this works, this doesn't work, I want to change this, I want to tweak that. So, the process is linear, but it's not in a way, because I'm just messing and tweaking with things here, trying to get the contrast for that right. I did actually try to end up looking up references for this reflective material, because just black, shiny, reflective material, while I think it looks cool, is just the bane of my existence. It's really hard to get right. So, kind of just working on that, trying to get that drawn in right. And I also am keeping this on a separate layer above the stomach because I know that there's going to be like a mesh covering on her stomach too. So I just want to keep that in the way. And I'll mention this now because I think I'm going to get close to it later. But any kind of texturing or patterns, I will usually save for later. So I know that I'm going to be using a mesh pattern for her top and also for like her stomach area and also for her like stockings. I know that I'm going to be using a bunch of textures later, but I'm actually waiting and holding off on those just in case I need to paint over something. So there's like a mesh thing on her stomach that I'm like, oh, I know that needs to go in there, and I'm like, wait. In case you change the stomach again, don't put it in yet. So you'll see that I get a little bit closer to that later. Right now, I'm just messing with the lighting, but I'll mention it when I get there. But there is kind of an order to these things right now. I'm just trying to make things more polished. So the areas that need hard edges, give those hard edges. The places that need to be blended out, make those blended out. The areas that need to be separated with contrast here and there, just kind of do that. And I'm hopping all over because I'll draw for like 2 minutes, look at the piece and decide this needs this needs that, draw for 2 more minutes, and then kind of just do that. And I'll literally look at the piece and say, this needs more of this needs more of that. Adding in more reflected lighting here. I think at this point is when I decided I didn't like the shoulder, so I'm going to go ahead and redo it. But yeah, pretty much what I ended up doing is I have some anatomy models. It's just like those ones that you see in like science class, you know, the ones where it's like half the person and the other half of them is like the skeletal, or not the skeletal, the muscle structure. Kind of just looking at that as a reference because I think references are good to have, you know. Mental library, yeah, that's important, but you build that with references. So the more references you have, the more you just build on your mental library. And I think it's just nice to have one less thing to worry about because you're like, hey, I'm sure you're a smart boy. I'm sure that you can figure out how everything works and stuff on your own, but it'll take longer and not be as efficient as if you just use the freaking reference. So just, you know, references are your friends. Here you'll see I actually added in the dark pattern for the meshing on the stomach. I'm just kind of fixing up some of the lighting, make sure that that's good. And I'm using a lot of reflected lighting. So there is blue in the sky, and that kind of acts as like a giant overcast light. So I'm trying to incorporate as much blue into the piece as I can without making her super blue looking. Here you'll see I actually use the transform tool to make patterns, and here I'm also making a different pattern. There's kind of a hex pattern on her top and on her stocking. So that's actually what I'm trying to make here. I know I could make a brush for it, but sometimes I just make these patterns manually. So I just created a new canvas, make that. I don't know. It kind of just depends. Sometimes it's a brush. Sometimes it's just like this. Depends on how often I'm going to be using it. But you'll see here I'm just using the free transform tool to make that pattern. I have that top separated so I could just clip it down and everything looks neat and dandy. Adding in a little bit more lighting just to make it a bit more convincing. Some reflected lighting, the pink from the hair, and a little bit of just drop shadow. Adding a little bit more contrast. So brightness and contrast is just the filter I'm using for this. It's really good because you don't need to paint over anything you did. It just changes the actual values on things so you don't step on your toes as much. But you see here, I'm starting to get into the patterns and all the complicated transforming warping stuff. So at this point, you know, I'm almost done. I usually save these little bits just right at the end, just so, like I was saying, I'm not stepping on my toes, but trying to get some of those details in, getting into the really small stuff now. So usually what I'll do is I'll work from big to small. Usually the skin, I start with the skin to make sure that looks right, and then I'll go from areas that just go from big to small, and then just as things are starting to get down and like really specific, that's when I work on that. Hair now, this is kind of a combination of me just using a regular brush and also a hairbrush, but I also have these. I have no idea what these are. I kind of just found a reference on Pinterest. It was like, that looks cool, and that looks like a thing that could hold some Pokeballs. So let's include that. Not originally in the character design, but I figured it would be cool because, hey, I mean, if you're going to spend 10, 20 hours working on a drawing, and if it's a fan art of something, you could do a one for one, but I also do think it would be fun to kind of add your own little spin to it. So, I know that I changed up her design a lot. Hopefully it's still recognizable as her, but I am also trying to do my own thing with it and say like, yeah, this drawing is Iono, but you can hopefully still tell that I made it because I'm adding my own little twist to it. Like, for example, the interior of her coat, in the reference, it's actually just a solid color and it's pretty plain, but I decided to add kind of like a space foil texture kind of thing to it. We gotta make the coat look toasty, but it was more as a design element because I needed something with high contrast because I thought that it would help separate the interior of the coat from everything else. So here you see me messing with it. I kind of just used so I drew it in grayscale first, then did black and white, added a couple of different filters and messed with that to make it look spacey. But yep, here just kind of working on the last little bits of the details, making sure that the hands look right. So there will be some areas where I'll do a detailed pass, and then as I work on other things, those start to get more detailed, and then the things next to them don't look as detailed by comparison. I know that there's an illusion of detail, and you can technically get away with a lot. Like, for example, Wallop, the way that person draws metal is they're like a wizard. Their art looks super detailed, and then you zoom in on it, and it's super abstract, and it's implied detail. It looks amazing, and I have no idea how they do it, and it hurts my brain. So I'll just be Unga Bunga brain and just do everything manually because I can, so I will. But I just kind of go in, add in a bunch of details for stuff, and sometimes do a second, third, fourth pass, just as many as I can to make things look right. So initially, I thought this drawing was going to be pretty straightforward. I honestly thought I was going to be able to get it done in like 4 to 6 hours. But it took a little bit longer than that, and I think that that's okay. Sometimes you just got to be okay with the fact that these things take forever. You just got to not rush it, because if you start rushing it, you're going to start making a lot more mistakes. Sometimes you just need to be okay with the fact that things are going to take forever. I think that honestly, the hardest part of painting is just being patient with it, because you want to be done. You want to, you want to have that neuron activation from seeing them 2 likes on Twitter. You're like, oh, those 2 likes on Twitter, that's the whole reason I'm going, bruh. But I think it's important that you like the process and you are okay with it taking time, because I feel like it's more important that you do something right and it takes longer than do something 1,000 times really quickly and then are still doing it wrong on the 1,001st time. So that's why I go back and I tweak so many things. As I'm saying, this looks right, this still doesn't look right, let's go ahead and change it, let's tweak it, let's try to do something else with it. Even if I've drawn something 100 times, if I feel like there's a better way to do things, I'll still probably go and end up changing the process. So I try not to be too tied down by my workflow. I'm always trying to look for ways to make things more efficient. Here, I think I am literally just trying to get a lot of the final details in. I'm saving the hair for last because that's the thing that's in the very farthest back. So I'm trying to make sure that the character looks right first, and then I'm going to save the hair for last. Just adding in some of the final touches now, like the drop light, the drop shadow. Here, just going into the braids, free transforming it, just a bunch of those details. Sorry if I'm kind of all over. It's hard to keep up with the speed paint and comment real time. So I'm sure if I'm drawing this real time, I could be better at explaining what I'm doing. But since this is literally like a speed paint and it's going really fast, I try to make a point, and before I finish that point, I move on to something else because it just goes by too fast. Here's a neat little trick with the Pokeball after drawing them 20 times. See, this is what I'm talking about. I try to make a point and I just don't finish it. But I'm drawing the black band around it first because that's a layer above it, and then I can draw the red, and then I can draw the white underneath, and I don't need to worry about overlap and selection issues. So that's just, a little Pokeball pro strat for you after having drawn them a bunch. But yep, I'm just free transferring them now, just making sure that that's good. Also, I think having fun with the colors, because I haven't mentioned that a lot. I try to pull in colors from everywhere. So with the character, I'll include like a lot of the blue from the sky, green from the trees, yellow from her coat, red from the Pokeballs. Like if there's something next to something else, I'll usually try to add in a little bit of reflected light for it. And it's just the thing that I feel like makes Iono look like she belongs a bit more in her environment. So the blue highlights that are in the whatever material this thing is that I don't know what it's called is yellow from the coat. You see that? If that were just solid dark color, that would work, but I feel like you just using the colors that are around you builds a little bit better color harmony just because it looks like it belongs a little bit better. And I mean, you can always just mess with layers and, filters at the end. But I usually actually try to get it done during the piece just because I feel like it gives it a little bit more unity. And you're just like, yeah, the character, it doesn't look like you took a PNG of the character, dropped them into some random background, and hope for the best. I want it to try to look like they belong in their environment because their environment is going to affect the way they look. Just think of the Matrix, like everything is green. They color graded everything to be green, so there's green everywhere. But yeah, I'm just adding in a little bit of the final details now, just kind of going in. I am in home stretch now, and I can tell because this is really when I start messing with the lights and the highlights and the shadows, just trying to tweak some small stuff, really just looking at it saying, this needs more contrast, this needs less contrast, this should be a highlight, this should be a something. But yep, I'm just kind of wrapping it up, messing with that. The 3 circles that are like in the corner, the top left, that was meant to be a magneton, and I was gonna add him in as a Pokemon, but I think I had decided that I was gonna be more of a distraction than anything else, because usually I try to fill up as much of the canvas for better composition as I can, but I was just like, I think that magneton is kind of just distracting because he obscures the tree behind him, and the tree is enforcing the perspective because there's implied perspective, like she's looking down at the camera, and I feel like that magneton's getting in the way of those trees, which are supposed to be reinforcing the perspective. So even though I like that idea, it got in the way. So that's just one of those things where I was like, hey, I get to save some time because I don't need to draw the magneton, and it works out better for the piece in my opinion. And I was like, hey, that's just a win-win overall. This is great. So kind of just tweaking and changing things. I think at this point I had already decided that I wasn't going to keep him. I was just like, we're going to finish up the hair, we're going to get our lighting good, and then we'll be done. So you'll see here, I'm just trying to add in a little bit of the stringiness to the hair, but also trying not to draw every strand. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to get light and shadow in the right places. Then I'm going to use a hairbrush, and then I'm going to go over it with a soft brush to kind of blend it out and make it not look as... I have no idea what the word would be. I try not to make it look as fibrous, I guess. Not as stringy looking for the hair, because I wanted her hair to have a very soft kind of look to it. It's like I don't know, whatever the hair equivalent of Play-Doh is. Here with the hair, you see is just a quick little shortcut, just hue and saturation change. Try to do it on the other side too, but that didn't work, so I just needed to paint it manually. But just some small shortcuts like that, trying to make that good, trying to make it cohesive. Usually at the end, I'll add a little bit of color correction as well, just to kind of make things fit a little bit better. Like I pushed her hair a little bit back into the blue from the sky just to make it a bit more like implied atmospheric perspective. But here, just adding in some of those details, a little bit of drop shadow, just the small stuff. Like I said, I work on the smallest details at the end. I'm realizing now I forgot the little magnet thing that's supposed to be on her shoe, and I think I also forgot to draw her foot. So, that's cool that I see that now when I'm recording this voiceover. But hey, I mean, that'll be a little secret between you and me. If you watch this video, you'll know that she doesn't have a foot. But yeah, that's pretty much my process. I hope that any of what I said makes sense, or if it doesn't make sense, at least you understand my thought process, like kind of what goes into the drawing. Like I said, it's sped up, so it's really fast, and it's hard for me to start and finish an idea before I need to move on to the next point, like this with me using a zipper brush. But hopefully you did find this video helpful. If it did, please let me know, because like I said, it's probably going to get age gated or restricted because it's a little spicy, but I don't really care about this video making money. I just know that it kills reach for stuff. So if this video was helpful, please like it just so other people can see it, because trust me, I'm not going to get rich off of this. But yeah, I hope you guys like the drawing. I hope you guys like the video. And if you like what I do and want to support what it is, I'll just leave a link to the Patreon down below. And I'll see you later. Bye.